everyone. My name is Davina Fankhauser with the organization Fertility Within Reach. I'd like to thank you for joining us for our Google Hangout on accessing infertility benefits through your employer. Today I have three very special guests with me who did just that. They advocated for infertility benefits with their employer, and we're going to learn a little bit more about what's involved and try to break it down and show you it's probably easier than you think, and it is an opportunity a lot of employees don't realize that they have. So I'm going to actually let my guests introduce themselves and talk a little bit about what their experience has been with communicating with their employers. And Anna, why don't we start with you?
Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Curie, and I used to work for a foundation for 2 years, it was based in New York. Now I actually moved to London, so now I work on a different organization. So for me, so first of all, the foundation that I was working with, it was very much focused on human rights. So, one of the principles of the foundation was access for everybody to healthcare, and that was my specific role in my job, to actually do that for other people, and to support the organizations that would do that. And yes, so when I was approaching HR, I told them, actually, and yes, surprisingly, our insurance did not cover IVF. And I just found it to be incompatible with the principles of the foundation. So I wrote to HR and I said, my job is about access to healthcare. How come there is no coverage? So, and yeah, it was about 1 year and 4 months ago. And basically, the way it worked is that at first they said it was too expensive and like close to impossible. And then I started getting more people who for different reasons need IVF, either already had IVF and put all of their savings on that, or have different social situations or medical conditions that require them to have IVF. So when I was leaving the foundation, we already had 15 people in the group. We put together basically a book about the impact that the lack of coverage had on us individually. So some of the people from the group, they shared their stories, and we sent this book to pretty much all the decision makers in the foundation, including the president. Of course, copied HR, and also got in touch with one of the directors of one of the regional programs, who himself became a dad through IVF. So he was our main person who was pushing for it at the management level. So finally, after 1.5 years almost, we got a policy document, which it's a draft still, but it outlines a very open kind of coverage. There's no age limit. There's no number of tries. It's very blanket. It includes lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people. So, and yeah, this is what's in the works. And I'm still part of the group and following, now from London, of how this happened. And actually, I thought it would be more difficult. But I think because there are so many people who are affected in one way or another, and we are such a diverse group, when we were talking to HR as a group, it was almost impossible for them to suggest any kind of limitations because they are such a diverse group.
That's great. Thank you. Dr. Chen?
Hi, my name is Serena Chen, and I am a reproductive endocrinologist at the Institute for Reproductive Medicine and Science at St. Barnabas in New Jersey. And I guess I'm not a patient myself, but obviously I deal with patients' issues every day, and we take all kinds of insurance, but most insurances don't actually have very family-friendly policies. New Jersey is one of the lucky states where we tend to have more coverage than other states because we do have a mandate, but despite that, many people just don't have access to good reproductive benefits. So, and that includes people who are in self-insured companies because they don't fall under the mandate, single people, lesbians, gays, transgender. So as physicians, we run into barriers to care every day. So we're recommending treatment. We feel like this is the safest, this is the most effective, this is how we're going to solve your problem. And then the insurance company comes in and tells us, no, you can't do that. And while we try to advocate at a higher level, with the administration, like at our hospital system, we don't like the benefits there. We're trying to meet with the president and trying to advocate for why they should cover it. I try to encourage every single patient because I do think it makes a difference. I see that people that speak up for themselves and tell their story and reach out often can make a difference in their own individual care. And ultimately, I think all those voices together, just like Anna said before, can make a very big difference as a society. And it seems like it's extra work and a pain in the butt, but if you don't say anything, it's extra work and a pain in the butt. So you might as well say something.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Regina.
Hi, I'm Regina Townsend. I'm a librarian, but I'm also the founder of the Broken Brown Egg blog. And my story is a little bit different because I live in Illinois, so there is a state mandate that covers infertility. But my biggest issue was in just kind of getting my job to understand what reproductive treatment would involve in terms of my hours or just my general well-being, and the fact that it was different. It wasn't necessarily like a maternity leave or a traditional sickness type of thing. So trying to just kind of advocate for myself and the fact that I may need to shift my hours a little bit differently because I'll be going through IVF, or explaining to them, what I would be capable of doing physically while I would be doing something so taxing. The benefit that I did have is working in a library. People are more, they want to research things, they want to know things, but it was important to really try to explain and be as honest and transparent as possible, because I wanted to set a standard so that if any other employees were to go through reproductive treatment, that they wouldn't have that barrier to get through, because I kind of would have, knocked the door down. So really being transparent about what it all entailed, as much as I was comfortable with sharing. What I was saying was that I took it as my responsibility to be very clear and honest and transparent with the administration of my job about what fertility treatment looked like in terms of how we documented things, in terms of my hours, explaining to them what I would be physically capable of doing. They weren't very closed-minded about it. Like I said, Illinois covers infertility treatment, but I was the first person in my office to go through it, so I wanted to make sure that anyone coming after me wouldn't have to have those same conversations. There'd be a little bit more of an understanding from administration and from the managerial staff.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. That is actually part of our discussion. So really the mission of this Google Hangout discussion is to help everybody else who follows know what steps that they can take, and to try to make it as easy as possible for them. And so, we heard from Anna that so all of us, I think, have reached out to our HR departments. And that can be very nerve-wracking for people. So I just like to find out from you guys, how did you go about that? Did you think it was more difficult? Was it that you were more anxious? It was worse because you were worried about doing it than the actual experience?
Yeah, I think that was the biggest thing, is because I felt like this is going to be an awkward conversation that I'm pretty sure no one else here has had before. And I didn't want to come across as though I was asking for anything special. I wanted to make sure that what I was asking for was understood to be my right and normal, and that they knew she's being honest, she's being clear, she's explaining everything. She's not, looking for any kind of special treatment. She's asking for understanding of what is going on. So I think my nerves about it made it more complicated than it needed to be, because when I finally sat down and just explained everything, she was mostly like, oh, well, that makes sense. Okay, well, we can do this. And it was clearer. I've had harder conversations with the actual insurance people about things than the HR people. They understood. I think we get into our head, and sometimes that, it builds this wall up that doesn't need to be there. And once you start actually talking about it, you know what you're talking about, and it makes it easy.
Thank you, Dr. Chen.
So when I see people talking to their HR departments, I think that it is often a tough thing. They have to talk to the insurance, they have to talk to the HR department. Sometimes people get a good reaction like Regina did, and sometimes they get kind of a hostile reaction, and a lot of people do feel like there's still a tremendous stigma around this, and that they can't tell anybody, and everything has to be a secret. The finding colleagues that are going through the same thing, like Anna did, I think is a huge part of advocating, because this is, even though this is about propagation of the human race and such a basic thing that is one of a basic human endeavor, having a family, it's often treated as something to be hidden, something private, something with a stigma, something with shame. And having other people that are in the same situation in your workplace, if you can find that often makes a huge difference. People who have gone there before you, people who are going through the same thing. And so, but it's hard because you have to know who to share with, and some people you can't share with. But I do think this idea of finding other advocates at work makes a very powerful statement. Like Anna said, there were so many employees that at this organization that felt it was such an important issue that the company really could not ignore it. And I think we are seeing as a society that a lot of these big, very successful Fortune 500 companies at the cutting edge of technology, like Google and Facebook and places like that, actually do feel like these kinds of policies, very family-friendly policies, very supportive of reproductive technology, and other things like adoption and things like that are, it's actually good for the bottom line. And I think, I send a lot of people to you, Davina, to get some of that ammunition, because you've gathered some of that data showing that if people are not miserable and depressed and anxious and missing work because of the burden of infertility, they are happier and more productive, and perhaps bring more in the long run to their company, to society. Even though short term, there are some costs associated with that. But if we look at this, putting the burden of those costs on the individual, it's expensive, it's burdensome, it's very difficult, and it puts people in these positions where they're making decisions maybe not based on the best medical data, but maybe based upon their pocketbook, because that's all they can afford. And yet, as a population, as a society, if we cover this, then it really doesn't cost very much at all as a society. I mean, we've just, as a society, obviously having babies and continuing the human race is kind of, I think, important to us as a society. So we have to shift this way of thinking. And I think advocates like people like Regina and Anna that are brave enough to step up and say, no, I know this is your normal policy, but something's wrong here. This is not right. Just because you normally don't cover this doesn't mean that that's the right thing to do. So I think that's a big leap of faith for everybody. But we should, they're right. It's important and it should be covered. And ultimately, I think everybody will benefit, including.
Thank you. Anna, I want to put a little spin on that question because you've already talked about a little bit about what you did. So one of the things I'm wondering is, what was your first step, how to contact the HR, and then how did you keep the conversation going for such a long period of time to reach the success?
I would say that persistence was definitely one of the things that helped a lot. So the way I started these conversations is that, as I said, because for me, the content of my work was about access to healthcare. So when I reached out to HR, I just started asking them questions. So, you know, why isn't IVF covered? Why isn't healthcare services for trans people not covered? And this is how I started the conversations. And I realized that because, like, you know, because their coverage wasn't aligned with the principles of the company, they had to do something. And then I also started digging out a lot of information. So I sent them, like, I was looking, I found Fertility Within Reach, I found Resolve, I found a lot of information that I was sharing, a lot of statistics, articles about how, you know, lack of coverage impacts people's lives. And then once we documented the stories about individual employees, I think that was real. This is when they realized it was really real, and it was very much our workplace wasn't supportive enough of so many of us. And some of the stories are really heartbreaking. You know, when someone had to get their retirement money and use it for IVF, and, you know, their mortgage, and it's just, yeah, like when you read them, or had to go abroad and you know, was bleeding in a country in a language which she didn't speak the language, and it was very difficult to go to the doctor. So, like, I think they realized how much people are, like, at what length people are willing to go to have a child, and how much lack of coverage was impacting their lives. Yes.
Can I ask you a follow-up question? So you
Yes,
did
yes.
a lot of research. So you were preparing for your meeting with the HR, and you said you created a book. Can you describe a little bit about what you prepared and presented to them?
First of all, because we have offices in different countries of the world, so we basically showed how there is difference in coverage. So, for example, you know, we have an office in London, or office in Brussels, or in Hong Kong. And because each country's legislation and national healthcare system is different, we just showed how much more money it is costing to US-based employees. So we included that. We included some of the statistical information about, you know, how many people approximately need that, and this is actually Fertility Within Reach materials are very, very useful for that. And then we asked the group to share their stories. So every person was just writing what was on their mind and what they wanted to share with HR. And because, I mean, for many of them, it was a very, like, therapeutic moment, because before they had, like, they thought they were the only one. And they thought that, you know, that they didn't feel comfortable sharing the story. So it was a way to share the story, but also in anonymously, that wouldn't bring any repercussions, but at the same time would make a difference. I thought that, you know, this was a very effective way to get the stories out, and to, and also, like, for us, because we didn't have a space where we could share the stories with each other, it was, like, for us also good to know more about us as a group without getting too personal, and, like, remaining, you know, colleagues in this space.
That's great. What you guys have accomplished is just amazing to me, and I'm glad that you came together as a group, because not only are you doing something for the organization and for the other employees, but it was a great kind of support system for each other as you're going through this. Because, as you said, and Regina had said, this can be very frustrating at times, trying to communicate, and you have to be persistent. And so having somebody to do it with, just one more follow-up question, because this is so interesting to me. How did you find each other? How did the 15 of you come together?
Basically, I talked about it during our staff meeting, and then people started reaching out to me. And actually, there were a couple of people in my program who had these issues, and they also reached out to other colleagues. And we posted on an internal network as well that we were doing that. So that's, yeah, so it was a lot of effort actually to get the group together. For the first maybe 6 months, it was just three of us, and then once I decided to start talking more about it, and once we started, posting on different social networks inside the organization, that's when we got a lot more people. And yeah, some of them were willing to share even on this, internal social network spaces without, worrying about it. So it was also like we were learning from each other about how to be open, about how to talk to managers about it. And it was really, I remember the first meeting we had as a group, some people were just crying because it was just so emotional to know that there are so many of us in one organization. And that, that HR is now has to respond to us because we're so many.
It's wonderful. I mean, it's just amazing. And that's one of the reasons I reached out to you to ask you to participate in this. And I'm going to jump right now to Dr. Chen, because I know you met with some people at HR to talk about benefits, and you did a lot of preparation. And I'm wondering, what did you find was best received, the most helpful, what maybe you didn't need? If you
I feel like it's still a work in progress. And I do think that what I'd love to do next would be something like what Anna is doing, to find people who actually have had experiences and are willing to reach out. That sounds very powerful. So the way I approached the people at my hospital who manage the benefits was basically to try to show them data showing that this is their current approach was actually very costly and really not safe and not up to current standards. And I do think that bringing published reports and bringing data and having you as a resource, Davina, to help me, gather some of that information is hugely, hugely helpful. I do think that as a society at large, they're starting to see pressure from society and other corporations saying, we don't manage our benefits this way anymore, our infertility benefits. And it does make sense to move more quickly to IVF to try to avoid multiples, and forcing people to do multiple cycles of IUI is a very old-fashioned approach that doesn't serve the company well. And it, of course, not good for the women and children either.
I think we unexpectedly temporarily lost Dr. Chen. I think she'll be back. Regina, I had actually seen an article that made me think of you and your experience out of an article called Infertility Issues in the Workplace. And it was actually written by a woman who works for a legal firm. And at this firm, they advise employers of what their rights and responsibilities are. In 1998, the U.S. Supreme Court held in a court case, Bragdon versus Abbott, that the ability to reproduce or bear a child constitutes a major life activity. They also say that if you have a physical or mental impairment or limit of one or more major life activities, you're considered disabled, okay? So under that, infertility is protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And now another court case came subsequently after that said, it's Laporta versus Walmart, that the district court ruled that an employee's Americans with Disabilities Act claim could proceed to trial, finding that infertility could constitute a disability under the ADA, and that the employee's request for time off, even with short notice, could be considered a reasonable accommodation. So, this is, you know, the American with Disabilities Act protecting people to be able to take time off from work to go have blood work done or an ultrasound. And sometimes it is with short notice with treatment, and you never know how those follicles might respond. So, you know, it's a little bit comforting to know that that's the case. There's one other court case to share with you, but I just want to know your thoughts, Regina. What do you think?
I think that's amazing, and I think that it's equally amazing how many people probably don't know that. That was one of the things that I was most concerned with. I wanted to make sure that I didn't seem like I was, you know, casting aside my work responsibilities, or that I was, you know, leaving anyone else holding the ball. And so it made the conversation about the fact that I may need this time feel really daunting. And I think having that kind of information would have taken some of that pressure off of me, and I would have felt more like I can really speak up and advocate for myself without, you know, feeling like it's just me. I have something to back me up. I think that would have been vital information for me to have. So I think that's something that more people really need to know about, that, you know, this is something that has been brought before the Supreme Court before, and you are protected for those random times where, you know, you have to get right back to the clinic because something came up that they need to change something around. Or for people like me who had to travel about an hour and a half to get to their clinic, having that, you know, understood that this is going to take me a little bit of time and I'll be back, and explaining to my job would have been so much easier, I think, with that. I mean, not that it was terribly as hard as some people have it, but having that in my back pocket, I think, would have been really cool information.
Right, it would give you more confidence. Well, here's another beauty. So the Family Medical Leave Act says, or it communicates, it entitles eligible employees to paid leave of up to 12 weeks because of a serious health condition. And the FMLA defines a serious health condition as an illness, injury, impairment, or physical or medical condition that involves inpatient care or continuing treatment by a healthcare provider. Therefore, an employee could demonstrate that his or her own infertility, or that his or her spouse constitutes a serious health condition under the Family Medical Leave Act. And there was even a court case, Culpepper versus Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee, that said, their decision suggested that infertility treatment could be covered under the Family Medical Leave Act, where an employee is able to produce evidence that the time away from work is medically necessary and falls under one or more of the FMLA qualifying reasons. So, you know, we have the American with Disabilities Act and the Family Leave Act that all support time off for infertility treatment.
Which most of us, again, have no idea that that's there. I mean, I think when you're going through it, until you get your advocacy hat on and you really start digging in and researching, it's so overwhelming and scary and private and isolated. And I think getting this information out to people so that they know that they have, you know, backup would be pivotal, I think, in people having these conversations with their jobs, or just getting up the courage for even to start treatment. I know that there are some people who feel like, I'm not even going to have this conversation. I'm just not even going to do anything. This is going to be a problem for me professionally, and so I'll just wait until a better time. And I think having stuff like this be more accessible to people, that they understood that this was something that was out there, would change a lot of people's lives. So I'm astounded that these things exist. And I am an advocate.
The final part of the conversation I just wanted to ask was, how did you go about following up with HR? So Anna answered that question already. So now I'd like to, you know, bounce it to you, Dr. Chen, and see what kind of follow-up you've had and how it's gone. And
follow-up, I think, has to happen this is ongoing. It's a process. We're changing how our society thinks about these technologies. The technologies themselves are changing, and we're trying to change how insurers approach things and how HR approach things. And all these things are kind of moving together. And so I still believe, like, every single day, every single patient at that particular moment, they need some support and help. And as a physician, I want to tell them that, yeah, you may not feel like you deserve these things, because infertility it's not the same as cancer. Like, when somebody has cancer, there's a tremendous amount of empathy and openness from society. People run marathons for you, and they bring you casseroles and things like that, and that's not the same for infertility. People are, in general, they're pretty well, they're walking around, they seem fine, and yet the consequences of infertility can be dramatic. The level of anxiety and depression and stress that people feel during the struggle, when we measure it with psychological measures, is actually the same as what cancer patients feel. So it's just that it doesn't show as much. So you're not getting as much empathy. So I feel like this is a continuing battle, and people that are willing, like you, Regina, to be able to be so open about it and talk about it in a blog and share those things so that other people know that they're not alone in this, is very important. So as a physician, I feel it's important to, and I think people should reach out to their physicians and say, I'm really struggling with my insurance. Do you have some advice, or do you have some help for me? And I have a whole staff of my people that are, their job is to try to make sure that the insurance companies pay the bills, but they have a tremendous amount of expertise, and they sit down with the patients and say, well, this Blue Cross Blue Shield tends to behave this way, and Aetna tends to behave this way. Let's try to approach getting your authorization this way. So we're still doing this one patient at a time stuff, at the same time trying to do more stuff like what you do, at the advocacy level, at a legislative level. And there's also even an interesting court case in New Jersey right now where they're trying to point out that the mandate is biased against lesbian and gays. So I don't know if I really answered your question, but I do feel like it's an ongoing thing. I definitely feel, and I feel like the more we talk about it here, hopefully, other people will hear that, yes, we've had some success in moving forward, for Regina for herself, me for my patients, you for yourself, and other people. And the efforts are making a difference. We have seen some progress, still have a long way to go, but I think it does make a difference.
I'm going to add on to that it does take time. So, for example, I, at the beginning of the summer, was talking to a patient, and she was trying to decide what plan to choose for her next open enrollment. And her plan offered infertility benefits, but it was really a small amount, in terms of infertility, what coverage you need for IVF cycles. And so what she did was, after a conversation we had, she decided to go to her employer and ask if they could have a conversation. And I'm going to join her for a meeting with her HR department, just as I actually did with Anna at her foundation. But you don't necessarily need someone like me to go. A lot of infertility patients can feel frustrated that their employer doesn't offer it in the first place. In fact, they can even feel angry about it. But the truth is, here's how it works. The employer goes to a broker. The broker says, here are these insurance plans you can choose from. Which one would you like? And often it doesn't even include infertility, and the employer doesn't realize they can go back to the broker and say, you know what, I want one that includes infertility. Or the employer may offer one without infertility benefits and one with infertility benefits. But again, the employer doesn't even realize that they necessarily have these options. So the better informed the patients are, the more conversation they can have with the HR department. Regina, what has your experience been following up with the HR?
Well, the biggest thing for me was really more with my manager, because once everything was really squared away with her, then it kind of trickled up. So it was really just it is a continuous conversation of here's what I'm doing right now, here's what I'll need in the next month or so, here's what I'm looking at in terms of my treatment. And again, it was because I'm so open, it was not something where I felt as terrified as I could have after the initial conversation when I did. But then the other things that I did do was I just tried to encourage and educate my community. So being a librarian, I am able to do things that go beyond me and my scope. So I used National Infertility Awareness Week to host a panel at the library about infertility. And I had actually the doctor that I eventually went to, I had a reproductive endocrinologist there. I had someone from the Department of Children and Family Services to talk about foster to adopt. I had someone there from a private adoption agency. I had someone there from Fertility for Colored Girls. So I had a way to kind of not only educate, my job, but also the community that my library serves about what to do. How do you talk to a doctor? How do you find a doctor? How do you look at your insurance? So that it wasn't just me educating myself or even my immediate supervisor or the HR department, but how can we educate everybody so that everybody understands how important this is and everybody understands what their options are and that there are other people in this community who need this no matter what, financial tax bracket they're in or whatever. This is something that affects all of us, and these are the resources that are available to you. So trying to just make that conversation ongoing, even beyond just the insurance benefits, was the biggest thing that I've tried to do.
I love you, but you know that.
I know that's so awesome.
You both are amazing. And I know Anna had to leave, and I understand that. But, every advocate, it like Anna was saying, this is a human rights experience, that we're going after. And I love that we're able to do this Google Hangout because we are, in a way, being a support and a resource to other people who want to try this moving forward. And men do this as well, too. So I worked with, I actually spoke at a conference with a man named Ed. And Ed had gone to his employer in previous years, multiple years, asking them for IVF benefits, and they said no. And after I met with Ed and I told him about, some resources and a tool that Fertility Within Reach had created, he went back to his HR department, shared the tool, and they said, we can see how offering IVF benefits would be an affordable option, for us to provide. And so they adopted another plan that people could choose from, which carried infertility benefits. And now the University of Michigan offers this benefit plan to nearly 8,500 employees. And I know that there were other patients that were communicating with HR and fertility doctors that were affiliated with the university were talking to them as well. So I think it's really a mix of having the information, approaching them with good communication skills and coming together and trying to, make a difference for the good of everybody. For me, this has always been about a win-win-win situation. It's good for the couple and their future family. It's good for the employers. It's good for the insurance companies because it saves money in the long run. And yet I don't take lightly the courage that it takes to go to your human resource department and talk about one of the most private and possibly painful experiences of your life. But what I tell people is when they experience being an advocate for themselves, it's empowering. And then once they know how to do it in this one thing, then they're doing it for other issues in their life, or they're helping their friends and family become advocates for themselves. And it's training for when they're parents, because they're going to have to be an advocate for their child. So why not practice advocacy in a way that's going to benefit you, and you're provided the tools and support that you need. So I love this, and I'm so grateful that you guys participated. Do you have any final words you want to share?
I think for me, the biggest thing is just do it. Just don't procrastinate about it, because there was a time where, you know, before I finally was able to have the conversation, our insurance changed at my job. And it wasn't that infertility wouldn't be covered, but specific doctors and things like that that are the most prevalent here in Illinois wouldn't be. And it was just really terrifying to me to think, well, now I don't have insurance. I felt like I don't have insurance because the doctors that I knew most about weren't available to me. But it took just kind of doing that private research and deciding, you know, I'm going to do this no matter what. I'm going to look into whoever I can, or talk to whomever I can, and not hold myself back any longer. And I think that with some people who do have the insurance, or they do have to have that conversation with HR, the fear of it all can, like I said before, just stop them, and they feel like, well, this will be too impactful for me professionally, and I'm just going to wait. But I feel like this is so important. It's so important to you emotionally and personally, that you owe it to yourself to get informed and get motivated. Find ways to encourage yourself, even when you're terrified, and just do it. Just go for it. Ask for help.
I totally agree. Don't suffer in silence. Be your own advocate. It's the same as we know now that so many people who have infertility often don't seek care because of concerns about things like this. And yet the vast majority of people who do seek care will be successful, will have a healthy baby. And this is part of it. It's part of the whole treatment, advocating for yourself and for coverage and for time off and all of those kinds of things. And knowing there's a community and a village and to support you out there is, I think, a great thing. So I'm so glad that you did this, Serena.
Thank you very much. My thanks to Anna Curie and Dr. Serena Chen and Regina Townsend of the Broken Brown Egg for participating in this Google Hangout discussion on accessing infertility benefits through your employer. Thank you so much, and we'll see you at the next conversation.